sky, the space of your mind. Try to see through them. Don't be distracted by them by focusing on them, but immediately use them as a cue, as a hint, as a reason to investigate the consciousness which is knowing them, that is perceiving them. Rather than focusing on the objective thoughts, let go of that and refocus on the subjective mind, its nature. Not obstructing, capable of reflecting anything that arises within it, not obstructed by them, not defiled by any thoughts that come. See if you can sever the continuity of discursive thoughts temporarily. Even let go of the sense of the presence of your body, the residual apprehension of its presence. That's being apprehended by your mental consciousness. Focus instead on the consciousness that's the matrix within which that's arising, that apprehension. Let go again and again. Even let go of the sense of an ego, an observer. Although that may be appearing in your mind, recognize that it also is appearing like all other thoughts, all other conceptual thoughts, as mental images, which you can temporarily ignore, focusing instead with concentration on the clear light nature of the mind. Recalling within this clear state of mind that we have an unparalleled opportunity right now, human rebirth in general, but one of leisure and endowment that is very hard to find, quickly decaying. With every instant we're heading toward the end of this opportunity that we often use for cultivating the 8 worldly concerns, the 8 worldly dharmas. not taking advantage of its real essence, which is to be able to practice the holy Dharma, to develop understanding of renunciation, develop a real sense of it, an understanding of compassion and development of bodhicitta, the causes of it. We can use this life every day to meditate more and more on emptiness, creating karmic instincts so that in future lives we meet the teachings and can easily proceed from there. All living beings who've been our mothers numberless times, and infinitely kind, depthlessly kind, that we don't recognize now in that way because of the different appearance they have, different guise that they're taking. We might recognize them as irritations or as objects of our manipulation or our desire. All of them are exactly the same as we in wanting to be happy, wanting to be free of suffering. Thought to repay their kindness, because it's due to their kindness that we actually can achieve the perfection of morality, the perfection of generosity, patience. We do so in dependence on sentient beings. We achieve enlightenment and dependence upon them. So with the thought of dedicating our energy toward the goal of bringing about the alleviation of their suffering, their achievement of enlightenment. I think I'm going to participate tonight in class, listen, participate, for the purpose of developing good qualities, not yet developed, enhancing those that I already have, diminishing and eliminating our negative faults so that I can be less a burden to others, and I can provide positive attributes and eventually actually lead them out of suffering, be an actual friend, guide with no ulterior motives, no expectations, with perfect power and bliss in my own mind. I'm going to listen, participate tonight in order to achieve enlightenment of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Relax. Bring your attention back. How's everyone? Good? See you in a while. Mr. Ashok, is the capturing? So I got a little surprise for you this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. What is this? A quiz. So, pass that over. more? This is still need another? Oh, sorry, sure. That's all. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first 13 questions. You must say 13 sounds like unlucky number, right? In Dharma, 13 is considered very auspicious. It's supposed to be inauspicious for worldly concerns, but very good for Dharma concerns. So the 13 sort of multiple choice. Most of them are easy. So we're going to do those right now in the next 5 minutes. So you just circle your answer. So right now you've got 5 minutes. Okay. Then the latter part we're going to do later. Just the first 13. You don't need 5 minutes. So fast. Don't focus just on the tension or shock. Also focus on the joy of those who are quickly. No, we'll do that later. Oh. Just the first 13. Okay, so who isn't finished yet? So, okay, couple more minutes. Ready? Should it still capture?
Yeah.
I thought you pressed escape or something.
I stopped for a test for a moment.
Oh, yes, keep on. The people who are watching the video will also take the test. They have to. Okay. We got 1 more minute. Less than 5. people almost finish. So, last 15 seconds now. Okay. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so this is self-mark exam. So now we'll take. We're not going to be. It's not a democracy. It's not going to be like. I'm going to ask you what the answer is, and we'll take your consensus. But we'll see if it could be that it's democracy. So, first question: what's the right answer? The tenet system of the low-rig text we are studying is. Which one is that? The third or the fourth one? The third one, eh? Anyone have doubt about that? Did you have doubt?
I got it wrong.
You got it wrong? What did you say?
Mahayana.
Mahayana. No, actually, these are, this tenet system is one of the Hinayana tenets, right? Second one, the appearing object of conception is permanent, impermanent, or both? Impermanent, permanent.
So far it's tied.
We have to take a
I
vote.
said permanent too, so I
2-1.
What do you say, Maureen?
think permanent.
Permanent. Buddy? Permanent. I forget your name.
Mark.
Mark.
I think permanent.
Permanent.
Pat, permanent.
Permanent.
Who's gonna say
Maybe it's
permanent?
the
What do you?
I know.
Marcia?
This is the
You said impermanent, so you're with me. Okay.
So all the impermanents are on that side.
Okay, I think the right answer is permanent. The appearing object of conception is what? What is the appearing object of conception? It's a mental image. It's a meaning generality. And according to Sautrantika, meaning generality is always permanent, right?
You said it was a meaning generality?
That's what the appearing object of conception is. It is a permanent phenomenon, according to Sautrantika. The appearing object of perception is permanent, impermanent, or both. Can be both.
Impermanent.
Impermanent. This is both. She's being very, it's a new age, very sort of encompassing. Can the appearing object of perception for Sautrantika be permanent? You didn't study before, did you?
No, I just came, but I took a little bit of a similar class with my
Okay, what do you think? Can the appearing object of perception, according to Sautrantika, can it be?
I think impermanent.
It has to be impermanent, right? According to Sautrantika, you cannot perceive directly permanent phenomena. According to Prasangika, the higher tenets, you can, because you can perceive emptiness directly. Not only directly, but with a direct perception, but directly. It can be the appearing object. But for here, it has to be, the appearing object of perception is impermanent. Is an eye consciousness necessarily a direct perceiver? Maureen, what do you think?
I say yes.
Ah, okay. John?
I said yes.
Yeah, Bunny? Oh.
Yes.
I don't like
Yes.
that look.
I had said no, but I'm
Okay,
willing to
good.
move.
You said yes. What's your reason for saying no?
I think I was hung up on the word necessarily.
You're
That-
clever, right?
I was, well,
Is an eye consciousness necessarily a direct perceiver?
I guess
Chris, what do you think?
I say no.
What's your reason?
Again, necessarily, because there's different ways to divide that up.
What's an example of an eye consciousness that's not a direct perceiver?
If you're inattentive,
No, is that right?
I don't know.
That's one of the divisions of direct perceiver. But an eye consciousness can be a wrong consciousness.
Mistake.
And in wrong consciousnesses are not direct perceivers. Remember, direct perceivers are, remember there were 3 divisions. It's going to come in one of the other questions. So if it's an eye consciousness, it doesn't have to be a direct perceiver or direct perception. You can have a wrong consciousness, and that's not called a direct perception or a direct perceiver. It's a wrong consciousness. Direct perceivers either have to be prime, subsequent, or inattentive. Okay, good. Okay, so that's good. Got your thinking.
But if it's a wrong, can I just ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah, sure.
So it's a wrong perception, like because there's a fault with your I,
Mhm.
sense power, that's still a
Or-
perception versus a conception? I guess I was thinking of it as a perception versus
Right.
a conceptual.
Right. Usually what we would say then is a non-conceptual,
Wrong.
yeah. I mean, anyway, here it says direct perceiver.
Right.
And that's the thing that we've been using. So,
Okay.
number
It's-
5 is a self of persons and object in general.
Couldn't be mistaken.
So in unison? Self of persons and object in general? I heard a yes. What do you say, Marcy?
I understand the
You
question.
don't answer, okay. Karen, what do you think?
The four-
Self of persons, is that an object in general?
I just took a reeling guess and said no. I have no real reason.
You're not sure what, Karen?
I think we'd all have the group agreement that there's a Venerable George that we hold as an object, perhaps.
Here, the self of persons is the one, obviously, that we're talking about that's being refuted, right? So it's not an object in general, because objects in general have to be existent phenomena. Like the horns of a rabbit is not considered an object in general. But the next question, is a self of persons an object in particular? You'd have to say yes. Why? Because according to the way that these tenets operate, even though a wrong consciousness, like say for instance we have a wrong consciousness that thinks about the horns of a rabbit, it's said that the horns of the rabbit are the conceived object. Even the horns of a rabbit are not objects in general, they're said to be the conceived object of that particular conception. Does that make sense? Do you remember that, something about that now? So this gives you, maybe some of these things will help you to go back and go over some points. Sometimes it's helpful. So sometimes things can, a self of persons here, this is referring to
I did, yeah.
the self of persons that is being refuted, obviously. Are all conceptions mistaken? Bonnie?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Oh, good, okay, good. Did anyone say no? Wait.
Or you could have a conception of selflessness, and I would think that might be a true conception, if you truly have.
But what's
that.
mistaken mean here? Bonnie, can you help me out? Or Maureen, can you help me? Mistaken with respect to appearing object, right? So all conceptions are necessarily mistaken because they're mistaken with respect to their appearing objects, in that, in different ways, the appearing object seems to be mixed with the actual object. Are all conceptions wrong? No. But this is where Carrie's answer would be right, because you can have many conceptions that are correct realizations, right? They're not all wrong. 9, is selflessness of persons realized directly by direct perception? This is, again, this is talking about these. Is it Dan? I forgot. Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I put no.
Selflessness of persons is not directly realized by direct perception. Why? How come?
Because it's not an object.
Selflessness. I think I said selflessness of persons. That is an object because it does exist, doesn't it?
Hmm.
What do you think, Thea? Is this too complicated?
No, I did put yes, because realizing something by direct perception, you would have to be a knower that has an awareness that is, I would say, new and incontrovertible, so it would be non-mistaken.
Mm-hmm. But can you realize it directly, according to Soquel?
That's where I get confused.
Mm-hmm.
My intuition says yes, but then I may be wrong because it's a Soquel.
Well, that's the one we're studying.
I know.
Maureen, what do you think?
Well, I said no because it seems to me what we're trying to do is to find the path to realize it through inference.
Well, first we have to realize by inference, right? But when you realize it by direct perception, how do you realize it?
I don't
according to
know.
Soquel?
That's what I couldn't figure out.
Indirectly. Why? Because is selflessness of persons permanent or impermanent? permanent. It's a permanent phenomena, right? And can that appear directly to direct perception? Can that be the direct object? No. According to Sautrantika, we mentioned a couple times, when you realize the selflessness of persons, what you're perceiving directly in your meditative equipoise are the aggregates of the person which are devoid of a permanent, partless, or self-supporting, substantially existent person. And indirectly, you realize that those aggregates are empty. Because emptiness can't, for them, emptiness, all permanent phenomena cannot appear directly to direct perception. Remember? Does that make sense? Do you remember, Don?
Well, I get confused between the present geek and the Sautrantika. This is the discussion I think we had last week about.
Okay, you gotta get unconfused. Right?
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm grokking it.
You got it. Okay, Carrie's here to help you. Okay. Does that make sense? Anyone have a question about that?
Can you say the last sentence you did about?
When we, according to the Sautrantika, according to the Hinayana tenets, in general, you can't realize permanent phenomena directly, with direct perception.
Does a Buddha?
Yeah, no, they're talking about, we're talking about, even a Buddha doesn't realize, he knows these, he would know them indirectly. He knows it with direct perception, he knows all phenomena with direct perception. But here, the permanent phenomena don't appear to direct perception. Remember, there was one of the hallmarks of these tenets were the appearing object of direct perception has to be impermanent. So selflessness of a person is not impermanent. So according to them, what you're actually realizing the aggregates which are impermanent. And indirectly, because of the force of that, you're knowing that they are empty of a permanent person, self-supporting, substantially existent person. According to the higher tenets, according to Prasangika, you can realize emptiness with a direct perception directly, because emptiness can be, permanent phenomena can appear to direct perception.
So then, are there no Sautrantika Aryas?
It depends on what you mean by Sautrantika Aryas. There, if you were to, according to, that's one of the things in the tenets. In order to lead people to actually make higher realizations, they have to have the right view. In order to become an Arya being, noble being, who realized emptiness directly, you'd have to have the correct view of emptiness. If your view of emptiness was one that was a Sautrantika view of selflessness, or the Chittamatra view of emptiness, or even the Svatantrika Madhyamaka view of emptiness, from the point of view of the highest Buddhist tenet, you couldn't, on the force of that realization, eliminate the afflictions from your mind, from the root. That would not be called the path of seeing. It'd be very high realization, and it'd be very close. And maybe individuals like that, the Buddha actually appears to them, even if they don't have a teacher at that time, who knows, and leads them a little bit further. But, so the Sautrantika, if you were to say, are there any Sautrantika Aryas, if someone was actually adhering to Sautrantika tenets, and that's all they meditated on, they wouldn't be able to really achieve Aryaship. That's why in the Prasangika, when they talk about the Abhidharma, and in some of the Hinayana schools, it says that there can be arhats who fall from the state of arhatship. Because according to their view, their tenets, even today I think sometimes they say this, according to their tenets, you can achieve arhatship, that means total cessation of all afflictions, and then they could arise again. You could fall from that. But from Prasangika point of view, that's puba. That's baloney. That wouldn't work. So if you were subscribing to those tenets, you wouldn't actually be an Arya. How many types of prime cognizers are there? Or in other words, valid cognizers? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Take a vote. 1? Anyone for 1? Anyone for 2? Anyone for 3? Okay. And anyone for 4? Okay. So no one chose 1. That's interesting. It's not the right answer, for sure. I think the answer should be, what do you think? Who has a strong opinion? How could you count 3 valid cognizers? Always have valid cognition. There's 2. Direct valid cognition and inferential valid cognition. And there's a famous quotation that we'll talk about again today, but we've talked about this before. Because the objects of knowledge are 2, hidden and manifest. Of course, you can say deeply hidden, but still deeply hidden is also understood by inference. And manifest phenomena are realized by direct perception. Therefore, the number of prime cognizers are 2. Okay, so what are they? Direct prime cognizers and inferential prime cognizers. Is that what you thought?
There was one more that I couldn't remember.
Then
Subsequent cognizers aren't considered prime
okay, here's a good question. Dan's got a question. Who's going to
in the sun.
eliminate the darkness of his mind? Who's going to? Karen, can you eliminate the darkness?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's right. In the Satrantika,
In the Satrantika, is it?
it is not prime cognizer
Right. Why not?
because of that train thing.
It has to be. That's right. It has to be a prime cognizer. A prime cognizer has to be what? It has to be new, or fresh. It has the first moment.
Yeah.
So you're right. In the higher tenets, subsequent cognitions not only realize their object, but they can be called prime cognizers according to Prasangika, but not according to the other tenets. It has to be the first instant.
Self-knower would be a prime.
Can a self-knower be a prime cognition?
Yeah.
Sure. Could the first instant of it could be, but the subsequent instance would be subsequent cognition. Okay. And is inattentive perception, in other words, consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained, is it a direct perceiver? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think, Thea?
Yes.
Marcy said no. I think anyone who gets them all wrong gets a special prize, because that means you've been really thinking hard. Actually, you probably get more credit than someone who got some of them right. Inattentive perception is a direct perceiver. It's one of the divisions of direct perceiver, remember? Let's say in sense direct perceivers, what are the divisions? Prime cognizers, subsequent cognizers, and inattentive perceivers, right? Or consciousnesses to which an object appears but is not ascertained. So it is a direct perceiver. It's not like a wrong consciousness. You could have a sense consciousness which is wrong, and that's not a direct perceiver. But an inattentive perception is one in which the organ is actually seeing something. Let's say if you talk about eye perception, but you're thinking about something else or listening to something else, and you're inattentive to that. So can that inattentive perception be a prime cognizer? Yes or no?
No.
No, why not?
Because the prime cognizer would have to be incontrovertible, so it would need to be realizing its object, but if it's inattentive, it's not realizing its
It's
object.
not realizing its object. Inattentive perception is not able to ascertain, is not able to induce a remembering consciousness. So how could you call that a realization? It's not a prime cognizer, right? It doesn't realize its object, and therefore it's not a prime, can't be a prime cognizer. Does that make sense? And 13, lucky number, are facsimiles of direct perception necessarily conceptions? Yes or no? Necessarily. Gary says yes. Don says
No.
no.
I said no.
You say no?
I said yes.
They're necessarily conceptions, okay. What's your name in the back? Catherine. You didn't answer that, okay. What do you think? You studied a little bit? Don't know? That's one of those. Marcy, did you even try? That's one of those obscure parts. We did talk a bit about it, but it's not easy to remember all this stuff. Thea?
I said yes.
Answer is no. Because there are some, what is the, there's one division, there's 7 divisions of facsimiles of direct perception, one of which was non-conceptual, such as, and you notice I don't say perceptual, I don't say direct perception, non-conceptual, like say wrong distorted consciousness, sense consciousness, seeing a firebrand as a circle of light, or seeing 2 moons, or something like that. Okay, not bad. So, anyone get between 10 and 13, right? I was going to get summa cum laude or something like that. Anyone get above 8? Okay, good, excellent, excellent. Anyone get above 5? Good, okay. Anyone get above 3? Okay. Anyone get above 1? Did anyone get them all wrong? Ashoka. No, he didn't even take the exam. Good, okay. So, that'll give you an idea. We'll do one more kind of quiz before the final. There'll be a final exam at the end of the course for those of you who want to continue on and take the, get credit for this. You'll get a certificate and so forth. So, what do you think? Did it seem fair? Was that part fair or unfair? This quiz?
That was great.
It was okay? What was your question?
I have a question. Is an inferential cognizer a conceptual
Consciousness.
Yeah.
Inferential cognizer, what do people think? Is inferential cognizer conceptual or?
Yeah.
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 We see we're trying to be democratic.
So then question 7, are all conceptions mistaken? But then, so is an inferential cognizer a mistaken?
Yeah.
It is.
It is mistaken. Why? It is mistaken, but it's not wrong.
Because it's conceptual.
It's conceptual. There is a difference between the power of realizing something with conception, realizing it directly. The conception is mistaken only in the sense that the word mistaken here, the way that we've been using it, is that the consciousness is mistaken with respect to its appearing object.
Right.
Even if a consciousness is mistaken with respect to its appearing object, it doesn't necessarily have to be incorrect, because its comprehended object, in terms of a conception, can be right.
Right.
Can be comprehending, realizing, apprehending something correctly. Okay. Now, the last 10 questions I'm going to give you as like homework. So that you can take. What do you think? How long should you have?
Open book.
Let me think. No. Half hour you can take at, between now and next week. Just to pick a time. Maybe you can read over them once, and then you're going to do a little study. But you can't think. Read over them once, and I have to better look at this section, and then close it, and then we'll see how you did on that part also. How's that? Okay, good, great. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your courage in taking it. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about questions 5 and 6?
5 and 6.
I just don't even think I got the questions.
Oh, okay, because at the beginning when we were talking about objects, for something to be an object, it had to be a phenomenon. There were different synonyms of object. Object, dharma, that means phenomena, different things like this. In other words, it has to be an object of knowledge. It has to exist if it is an object, in general. If something is an object in general. But there are some things which are objects of some conceptions, which are not objects in general, but they're the apprehended object, let's say the conceived object of that conception, like a self of persons. A self of persons is not an object in general because it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Okay.
And so 6 are self of persons, and or you could say are horns of rabbits objects in particular. They're objects in the sense that they're the conceived objects of the conception that's conceiving of them.
Well, that makes sense. I just forgotten.
Yeah.
Object in general and object in particular.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay, this is a good reading. Okay. So, let's go on a little bit further here. We're doing well. I think we may finish, which would be very auspicious, we may finish this, all the material. We're going well. So, last time, my book is open to page 21. Is that about where we are?
Yeah.
We talked about, here it says, ancillarily, with respect to explaining minds apprehending a sign, there are 2 parts, definitions and divisions. We talked about something being a mind apprehending a sign. Do you remember that? So here, let me give a little background. When you talk about inference, in order for an inferential cognition to function in your consciousness, are you with me? In order for an inferential cognition to be functioning, you have to have the whole inference in your mind. Let's say, for instance, sound, subject sound. You don't have to say the word subject, but you say sound is impermanent. Impermanent is what's called a predicate in this case, is impermanent. There's sometimes you can say is predicates and exist predicates, you can say. And the sign, in this case, sound is impermanent because it is a product. That is, sound is a product. And then there will be an example. Like what? Sound is impermanent because it's a product, like a vase or something like that. It has to be, an example has to be something that you can realize the thesis on. The thesis is what? The subject and the predicate together. What's the thesis in that syllogism? Karen?
What sound is impermanent?
Yeah, that's the thesis. So the thesis is comprised of the subject and the predicate, right? And the sign is the reason, sometimes called the reason also. So you have to have that syllogism in your mind. You have to be thinking of that, and you also have to realized what are called. You have to have what's called the 3 modes. That is the property of the subject, the forward privation, and the reverse privation. Do you remember that? What that means? What's the property of the subject in that case? Who wants to venture for it?
Impermanence.
Property of the subject means that the subject is the sign. That there is a congruence between the subject and the sign. Otherwise, in this case, sound is impermanent because it's a product. Is sound a product? Yeah, you have to have realized that, either by direct perception or by some other inference. But you have to have realized it for there to be the property of the subject. You also have to realize the forward privation. The forward privation has to do with the fact that in a logical statement, there has to be some kind of necessity that if the sign is there, the predicate will necessarily follow, right? So the forward privation means, in this case, it would mean what? If something is
a
product, it is
impermanent.
It is necessarily permanent. So you have to have realized that, or you have to have realized the reverse privation. Actually, one will follow from the other. Usually the forward privation is what's talked about, but you could also realize the reverse privation. What's the reverse privation in this case?
If something's not impermanent, then it's not a product.
Right, you take the opposite of the predicate and the opposite of a sign, and goes the opposite direction. So if something is not impermanent, it's necessarily not a product. If you realize the forward privation, you will know indirectly. You don't have to ascertain to yourself the reverse privation. Okay? So these kinds of things are what are called establishing conditions. These kinds of understandings, establishing conditions. They establish your mind to a condition in which it's ready to realize, it's capable of making the inferential cognition actually function. Up till then, it's just a bunch of words in your mind. Some understanding which is maybe a belief that's getting more and more, a correct belief that's getting more and more strong. Now, the moment that those things are established such that the next moment it becomes an inferential cognizer, that particular kind of establishing cognition is called a mind apprehending a sign. Does that make sense? So what I call establishing conditions, when you realize the three modes, you realize the property of the subject, the forward privation, and or the reverse privation. At the moment when those are established in your mind, and the next moment you're about to develop, on the force of those, you're about to develop the inferential cognition. The inferential cognizer is about to actually realize, let's say sound is impermanent, that those minds at that point, those understandings are called mind apprehending a sign. So let's see what the definition is here. The definition of something being a mind apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sound product. That's the very syllogism we're talking about, right? Okay, what is such a mind? It is a knower. It has to be some cognition in your continuum, in the continuum of a full-fledged other party for whom sound is being proven to be impermanent by the sound sign product. A full-fledged other party means, what is a full-fledged other? Sounds like some kind of thing for advertisement for soap powder or something. Full-fledged other party. Ashoka, how are we doing on the tape? How many? No, I mean on the videotape. How many minutes?
We're 48 minutes because we started late a little bit.
So still have more. Okay. So full-fledged other party means this. Someone who has not yet realized that sound is impermanent by a sound product. Has not realized. They have to, otherwise you can't be someone who is an other party. Here it says other party. We say chigo in Tibetan. I'm not sure what the Sanskrit term is. So there's a chigo, an other party. If you have realized that, you're not an other party. If you've realized that sound is impermanent. This means someone who perhaps the syllogism is being proffered to, is being suggested to. Okay? So a full-fledged other party has to be someone who has all the correct characteristics. They have not realized that sound is impermanent, and they're wishing to know that. Okay? So they have to be, so we're talking about the mind apprehending a sign and the proof of sound, that sound is impermanent by the sign product. That's the syllogism we're talking about. What kind of mind apprehending a sign is there in that? It has to be a knower in the continuum of a full-fledged other party for whom sound is being proved to be impermanent by the sign product. And it is a common locus. What does a common locus mean? Is that the kind of one that's different than a 17-year locus? Common locus is the one that comes every year. Very rare. Do you know what that means? Have we talked about that term before? Have you heard that term?
I've heard of it in terms of like a point. That
okay, so in terms of logic, and as it's being used here too, a locus, a common locus means something which fits two different categories. Like say, for instance, if you draw, what are those things called that they used to learn in grade school? Venn diagrams? I want to say Zen diagrams. Remember Venn diagrams? So here's one set, you might say. Here's another set. They intersect at some point. The common locus would mean that place where they overlap. Can you see that? Where they... So, the common, that means it has to fulfill both of these criterion. In other words, it has to be something which is both, one, incontrovertible. It is incontrovertible with respect to either that sound is a product or that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. What are these two things? Those are realizing what? The property of the subject. That it realizes either that sound is a product, that's the property of the subject, right? Sound is impermanent because it's a product. So that either the person realizes the property of the subject, or he or she realizes the forward privation. Could also say a third one here, the opposite of this. Whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Or it could be whatever is not impermanent is necessarily not a product. You could also add that in. This is just giving those two modes. So it has to be a common locus of that. It's incontrovertible. In other words, it realizes that. Realizes either the property of the subject or the forward privation, and it is the cause of an inferential cognizer realizing that sound is impermanent by the sign product and arises in dependence upon acting as a causal condition. Does that make sense? So mind apprehending a sign is something that becomes a cause of realizing. I don't think, it doesn't say here direct cause, so it doesn't have to be the exact previous instant, but somewhere in that continuum, it's become a cause of realizing that inferential cognition from that time. I think if it's like weeks before and you're thinking about it and you've realized one of those, I'm not sure that's called a mind apprehending a sign, if you just realize the property of the subject or the forward privation. But in a full-fledged other party who has that syllogism in mind and is about to realize it, that those particular understandings are called minds apprehending a sign. When minds apprehending a sign are divided, there are two. Minds apprehending a sign and the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product. This is not the only kind. This is in that particular syllogism, right? Which comprehend that sound is a product, and minds apprehending a sign and the proof of sound is impermanent by the sign product, which comprehend that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. Actually, there's a third one. What would it be?
Whatever is not a product is not impermanent.
Right. Whatever is not impermanent is not a product. When you take the reverse privation, you don't just negate and go in the same direction. The forward privation is saying whatever is the sign is necessarily the predicate. Right? That's called the forward privation. If it's the sign, it's the predicate. The reverse privation is if it's not the predicate, it's not the sign, necessarily. It's pervaded by being not the sign. You have to prove that.
Say that again, if not sign?
If not sign, not predicate. If not predicate, not sign. If it's not the predicate, it's not the sign. Does that make sense? Like say, for instance, the syllogism, on a smoky pass, fire exists because smoke exists. This would be a syllogism, by the way, in which you have an exist predicate. Notice I said fire exists. I didn't say there is fire. Fire exists because smoke exists. So does it have the property of the subject? On a smoky pass, smoke exists. Yeah. Right? You have to realize that. And you have to realize, let's say, the forward privation, which would be what? What would be the forward privation? The existence of smoke pervades the existence of fire. In other words, where there's smoke, there's fire. We say it that way? Not always? Where there's smoke, there's fire? You mean sometimes there's smoke and there's no fire? Where?
Like after a fire, whether it's just stumps burning for days and days and days, roots burn for
Well, still,
a week.
if they're still burning, then it's still fire.
Embers.
Yeah, it'll still be fire. It doesn't have to be, fire doesn't have to be flames, it has to be something that's producing smoke. So you can debate about this, like for instance, the last instant of the fire, does the smoke exist after that? Yeah, it does exist after that. So there can be some situations that you have to think about some endpoints like that. Was that 5 seconds or 5 minutes?
Minutes.
5 minutes. Could be. Ashoka's European, so I could be more precise than we are. Just. The definition of something being a mind apprehending in the sign of proof, in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product, which comprehends that sound is a product. Now it's giving the subdivision of that, one of those two. Okay, what does it have to be that particular thing that realizes the property of the subject? In other words, what's called the property of the subject is that the subject is the sign. Here, in this case, that sound is a product. It has to be a knower in the continuum of full-fledged other party for whom sound is being proved to be impermanent by the sign product. That is a common locus of being incontrovertible with respect to sound being a product. Right? It has to realize that. Incontrovertible means it realizes that sound is a product. And also, it is the cause of the inferential cognizer which realizes that sound is impermanent by the sound product and arises in dependence upon acting as a causal condition. What arises in dependence upon its acting as a causal condition? It's a long sentence. That was in the other definition too. Carrie? Okay, Gronk, that one. Bonnie?
The inferential cognizer?
The inferential cognition or cognizer is going to arise in dependence upon its, meaning this mind apprehending a sign, acting as its causal condition. Okay, so it has to be a cause and giving rise to that the next subsequent moments. The second one is easy also, I mean, it's just similar. Definition of something being a mind apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product, which comprehends that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. What's that realizing? It's the forward pervasion, right? It has to be a knower in the continuum of the full-fledged Shigo, other party, for whom sound is being proved to be impermanent by the sign product. If it wasn't being proved to that person that sound is impermanent by the sign product, even if they had that mind, it wouldn't be a mind apprehending a sign. They have to be thinking of that. This is being proved to them. It has to be a common locus of being incontrovertible with respect to whatever is a product. Whatever is a product necessarily is impermanent. And it has to be the cause of an inferential cognizer, which realizes sound is impermanent by the sign product. And that inferential cognizer has to arise in dependence upon that mind apprehending a sign as its causal condition. So it's a lot of words. When the first, minds apprehending a sign of the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product, which comprehend that sound is a product, that's the property of the subject, are divided, there are three. So there are three kinds of ways that you can have a mind apprehending a sign. You can have direct perceivers, inferential cognizers, and subsequent cognizers that are minds apprehending a sign. Or in other words, that are even more than establishing conditions, that are ready to give rise to that inferential cognition. They're the things that have to be present. So if you're realizing that all phenomena are empty, because they're dependent arisings. You'd have to have the property of the subject. You'd have to realize all phenomena are dependent arisings. And if something is a dependent arising, it is necessarily empty of true existence. You'd have to have those cognitions in your ready to be realized. Let's take a little break. I think I can see some blood sugar is necessary. And we'll start right after that. Yeah. So I'm just checking here how the Venerable Soquel did. She gave me, see, okay, she said, first one, she said, Sautrantika. Okay, she got 1. The appearing object of perception is permanent, right? Okay, 2. The appearing object of perception is impermanent. She got 3. Eye consciousness and isolated direct perceiver. She said yes. Is a self-person an object in general? No. Okay, she got that right. Is a self-person object in particular? She said no. Are all conceptions mistaken? She said yes. Good. Are all conceptions wrong? She said no. Good. Is selflessness of persons realized directly by direct perception? She said yes. Good. How many types of prime valid cognizers are there? She said 4. You have to say no. Good. Is inattentive perception a direct perceiver? She said no. Good. Can it be a prime cognizer? She said no. That's correct. Are facsimiles of direct perception necessarily conceptions? Necessarily conceptions? She said yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So she got 7. Good. Not bad. But that means it would be better that she came to class. Because she's smart. But she'd probably get a better score if she came to class. Anyway, that's just my way of teasing her. She's a good student. She studied this before. Okay. So maybe you overheard the discussion about that. Doug? No. Mark.
You can call me Al.
Mark. You can call me Al. It's like the Simon song, Garfunkel, whatever his name. Mark, I can remember that, like a logical sign, a logical mark. If I call you sign by mistake, I used my wrong. No, I mean, I'm trying to remember like a logical mark, a logical sign. I'm trying to remember it that way. Because you're very logical. And he was asking about why we're studying this, and I just was reiterating that this is something that acts as, it helps to develop our wisdom of knowing the teachings, hearing. It's not something we know intuitively, what path to follow, what constitutes correct knowledge, and the path to be able to develop correct knowledge and so forth. So it's very, very essential, very useful, what we're doing. So, when you talk about minds apprehending a sign, so these are something that realizes, let's say in this case, it's just talking about 2 of the 3 modes, either the property of the subject or the forward privation, and that acts as a cause of that inferential, cognizer. So you can have minds apprehending a sign which are direct perceivers. What could be an example of that? An illustration of that? That is, here's the next paragraph, an illustration of a direct perceiver that is a mind apprehending a sign. Because a mind apprehending a sign has to be a knower which is incontrovertible, that's realizing something, right? In the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product, that comprehends the sound as a product. So how could you comprehend that sound is a product with a direct perceiver? The illustration is a direct perceiver comprehending that sound is a product in the continuum of a full-fledged other party for whom it is being proved that sound is impermanent by the sign product. How could a person, what kind of direct perceiver could you have that realizes, if you had a direct mental, understanding, how are you going to have a direct perception that sound is a product? It's going to be a sense perception, right? How do you perceive that sound is a product?
What you drummer.
That's one of the classic. It may not be talking about subtle impermanence, because sometimes the mind apprehending a sign might be something that's apprehending the gross version. That, like for instance, that you throw a rock and that the sound arises as a product of causes and conditions. So you can have a direct perception of that with your eye consciousness or with your tactile consciousness. You hit the table, you say, oh. You have some kind of realization of that. How about realizing that sound is a product through inferential cognition? That's the second kind of way that you could have a mind apprehending a sign through an inference. So that would be an inferential cognizer comprehending that sound is a product in the continuum of such a person. Sound is a product. So you could have an inference that's helping to understand the other inference. Okay? The mind apprehending a sign is not yet itself an inference, is it? The mind apprehending a sign is just an incontrovertible knower that's knowing one of the establishing conditions for the syllogism. Maureen, am I losing you? You okay?
This is hard for me, but I just
Okay,
have to
I noticed you're relaxing.
Yeah, that's not good.
You're blanking out, and your cup of tea, and it's a little bit, yeah. Yeah, I figured you were
But I'm
relaxing.
I'm
You're- Okay, you're here,
I'm
okay.
listening.
Okay, so in a logical statement like this, a logical reason, we call it syllogism. See, sound, the subject sound is impermanent because it's a product. If we can realize that, here it's talking about subtle impermanence. It's not talking about gross impermanence. That would be a very great realization to realize that sound is impermanent. So it would be very useful. Also that a person is impermanent and so forth, because it's a product of causes and conditions. So in order to develop that inferential cognition that realizes that, you need to have realized the various elements of the syllogism. Otherwise, it's just a resounding of words. Oh, yeah, I know. Sound is impermanent because it's a product. Well, I don't really know. Some of you could say that, but that doesn't mean you've realized that. You have to have realized the various elements of it, that if something is sound, it is necessarily a product. Sounds are products of causes and conditions. And you have to realize, let's say, the forward privation, that if something is a product, it is impermanent, necessarily. If you have those things established in your continuum, your mental continuum, and they are presented to your mind at the same time, those realizations are dawning upon your mind as you go through that syllogism. Sound is a product. Sound is impermanent because it's a product. At that point, those understandings can become what are called minds apprehending a sign. More than establishing conditions, they're actually causes of that inferential cognition. But how do you realize those things? How have you realized that sound is a product? One way you can realize it is by direct perception. Another way is by inference. A previous inferential cognition, which might itself have had establishing conditions or mind apprehendings a sign that themselves were direct perceptions or even inferences back and back. There might have been many different kinds of inferences that brought about that kind of understanding. An illustration of the third thing, what's that? A subsequent cognizer, that's easy, which is a mind apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product, which comprehends that sound is a product. There are a lot of words necessary, right? Is the second moment and so forth of an inferential cognizer, or the second moment of the direct perception, realizing that sound is a product. Also, with respect to the second, minds apprehending a sign in the proof that sound is impermanent by the sign product, which comprehend that whatever is a product is necessarily impermanent. So this is realizing the forward pervasion. If something is a product, it's necessarily impermanent. How can you realize that? You can realize it by direct perception. Why does it have to be realized? Because it had to be a knower which is incontrovertible, right? That means it had to realize that. You can realize it with direct perception, inferential cognition, or subsequent cognizer. So those are, I won't go through those examples, those are similar, right? On the next page, page 23, about halfway down, not quite halfway, where the prime cognizers are divided in another way, there are two. How many ways were we dividing prime cognizers here? In two?
And a subsequent.
Subsequent is not prime cognizer. What were the two that we divided them into?
Prime and
Direct and inferential.
Direct and inferential. Now, you could also divide it another way into two. Those that induce ascertainment by themselves, self-ascertaining, and those that are induced by another consciousness, either someone else's consciousness telling you or your own, another mind knowing. So this is very interesting because it gets to a question that Diana was asking before about what constitutes direct perception, what constitutes a valid cognizer, in a little more detail. So, right? Let's go to the Rangluk on page 25, our own system. Gendrum Drup. Who was Gendrum Drup? Anyone know? Gendrum Drup? Was the first Dalai Lama. The first Dalai Lama. First Dalai Lama, when did he live?
1500s?
1500s, maybe 1500s? Who was he?
Was Lama Tsongkhapa one of his teachers, the first Dalai Lama? So then it would be 1400s,
When did Lama Tsongkhapa pass away?
1419, I think.
1419. Okay. Gendrum Drup was one of the disciples of the Dalai Lama. He wasn't called the first Dalai Lama at that time, right? He wasn't called the Dalai Lama. How about, do you know that? All right. You're
Well, of course he wasn't called the first Dalai Lama.
Why not?
Because there weren't any others yet.
Okay, then was the second Dalai Lama called the second Dalai Lama? Smarty pants?
Probably not.
Was the third Dalai Lama called the third Dalai Lama?
I don't know when they started. When did they
There
start?
we go.
Okay, yeah, there we go. The third Dalai Lama. The first Gendrum Drup, when he passed away, he was one of the principal disciples of Lama Tsongkhapa. When he passed away, his reincarnation was found. I can't remember the name of the second Dalai Lama. He wasn't called Dalai Lama yet. When he passed away, another reincarnation was found. He became a tutor to the Mongolian, maybe Khan, I can't remember what the title was at the time. And when he came there, his name had the word Gyatso in it. I can't remember what his whole name was. Gyatso in Tibetan means ocean. Like the present Dalai Lama, one of his names is Tenzin Gyatso. Usually he says, I'm the simple, when they ask, are you the Dalai Lama? He says, I'm the simple monk, Buddhist monk, bhikshu, Tenzin Gyatso. Gyatso means ocean. So the third reincarnation, there was Gendrum Drup, and then the second and the third incarnation of that lineage. It wasn't like they just started then, there was previous incarnation also. When he went to Mongolia, the Mongolians couldn't say the word Gyatso. Even today, when I was in Mongolia, I was there for about 5 months, a couple of years ago, 4.5 months, and I noticed on the maps in the school, because I learned a little bit of the Cyrillic alphabet, because they still use the Russian Cyrillic alphabet. They don't, only the older people know, at that time, know the old Mongolian script. They kind of turned over in the 20s or so to the Russian Cyrillic alphabet. So I could see a big body of water was called a dalai. That's what the Mongolian word is. They can't say, for some reason, in the Mongolian dialect, even though they know a lot of Tibetan words, and they even say a lot of things in Sanskrit, like one of the monasteries was called Manjushri. They can say a lot of things in Sanskrit quite easily in their tongue. It rolls off their tongue easily. Some things in Tibetan come very easily. But the word Gyatso turns out sounding like chomps. It doesn't work. Chomps. And so, I'm not sure the exact story, why, whether someone was displeased or whatever. So instead of calling him the Chomps Lama, they called him the Dalai Lama. Because Dalai is the Mongolian word for ocean, which the word Gyatso, which was part of his name. It doesn't mean, as people think, ocean of wisdom. I mean, indirectly, the word, all the names, the Dalai Lama's name, Nawang, Tenzin, Losang, Gyatso, all of the names, you can have some kind of poetic meaning, but they're just names, right? So the reason he was called he was given the title then as the Dalai Lama. The third Dalai Lama was called the Dalai Lama. And then, what's the correct term? Posthumously? Posthumously. The second Dalai Lama, the previous incarnation was called the second Dalai Lama, and the previous incarnation to that was called the first Dalai Lama. Okay, so, I'm just teasing as you're saying, obviously. Okay, so Genderdrup, ornament for knowledge. The general meaning of Dharmakirti's commentary on Dignaga's compendium for prime cognition posits thus. The definition of a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself. So this is kind of quoting Genderdrup, who was a disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa, as an authority about how the Galupas understand prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. This is also something that Dignaga and Dharmakirti talked about, I think. So it is a prime cognizer. So a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself has to be a prime cognizer, first of all. And it has to be able to induce ascertainment through its own power with respect to its own non-arising, the fact that it would not appear, it wouldn't exist, if the nature of its object of comprehension did not abide with the object. Does that make sense? What do you think, Maureen? Put the blanket up a little bit.
Okay.
In other words, a prime cognizer which is self-ascertainable means that it is able to, it knows its main object of, it realizes its main object of comprehension and knows, and indirectly therefore, it knows that it could not arise if that wasn't there. For instance, a division, let's say an example of that. What's a self-ascertainable prime cognition would be, say for instance, if there were a red cloth in front of me here, very close, and I could see that it's cloth. It's red color, but it's also, I know that it's a red cloth. I'm realizing that with my eye cognition, and that would be self-ascertainable, that I would know that cognition is able to induce ascertainment or certainty through its own power with respect to its own, that it would not arise, that this consciousness would not arise unless the object of comprehension, the red cloth, did not abide with the object. If the red color did not abide with the cloth, let's say. What would be something like a different example? Geshe Repton mentions in his book kind of a good example of an other ascertainable, something which is not self-ascertainable, that's still a real one, the second one here, a prime cognizer which is an ascertainment induced by another. In other words, it's not self-ascertainable, is a prime cognizer, and two, it's an ascertainment, it is a prime cognizer, and ascertainment must be induced through the power of another prime cognizer with respect to its own non-arising if the nature of its object of comprehension did not abide with the object. So the example Geshe Repton gave for that, I think it was a very good modern example. Maybe Gonzo Rinpoche, who translated it at the time, gave it, I don't know. Geshe had this example. Say, for instance, you're driving in the car. Do you remember this example? Some of you read the book ahead? You're driving in the car. Maureen, you ready? Driving in the car. You hear some knocking sound from under the hood. You have a prime cognizer, the ear consciousness of knocking sound. But that is not able to induce ascertainment that it would not arise if the knocking of the piston rods or something else was not there. You have to, either your mechanic has to show you, or you have to go under the hood and ascertain with some other prime cognizer that that knocking sound actually arose from that particular object of comprehension. What you're hearing, perhaps, let's say that it is the piston rods. Can the piston rods make this sound, Chris? What would be the thing? Chris is my resident car expert. What could it be? The knocking under the hood. Could it be?
It could be like a rat somewhere on the.
It could be a rat. It could be that there's that rat, or it could be.
It could be low-octane gas.
Low-octane gas. There you go, Catherine. Thank you. And it could be that I don't know, something rods or taps or something. I don't know. Tappets. Okay. Said, you're not sure. You just hear some sound. You do have a prime cognizer of the sound, but you can't. It is not able to induce ascertainment. The ascertainment must be induced through the power of another prime cognizer, with respect to the fact that it would not arise if the nature of its object of comprehension, that is the tappets or the mouse or whatever, did not abide with the object. Does that make some sense to you? So something, like say for instance, the classic example is, one of the classic examples is in the distance you see some red color. You're not sure, because is that Maureen's blanket or is that a fire? So you have to do, you can have a direct. You can have a prime cognizer of red color, but that would not be a self-ascertainable prime cognizer. It's not able to induce ascertainment that it would not arise unless the color of fire was there, the red color of fire was there, or the red color of blanket. It doesn't know yet. And either you have to walk up and see with your own perception, or someone has to tell you. Some other expert, a valid person, or binoculars, or some other kind of direct perception, some other kind of prime cognizer where you can realize that, what the actual object of comprehension was.
So I have this
I goaded Maureen into asking a question. Good, okay.
I was at a concert one time, and I was sitting next to a man who started telling me about the instruments, and I could hear the music before he started talking to me. But he knew everything about these instruments, where they came from. They were medieval instruments, things. I mean, I don't know much about music at all. But after he told me, then I could hear, he had words that helped me hear it in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I could say, oh, well, then what is that? And I couldn't differentiate them before he started saying, well, you hear this kind of sound, it's coming from that instrument.
And could you start to center in on that?
Yeah, then I could.
Maybe that could be something similar.
Is it something like that?
Maybe that could be similar to that.
Okay.
Let's see the examples here. The last line of this page, it says, whatever is an inferential cognizer, this is according to Sautrantika. If something is an inferential cognizer, it must be a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself. Okay? Inferential cognizers have to be prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. Does a prime cognizer, which here it says inferential cognizers have to be prime cognizers which induce ascertainment by themselves. Do all prime cognizers have to induce ascertainment by themselves? Well, if you just look at the definitions above, the second one, prime cognizer that induces, where the ascertainment is induced by another, it is a prime cognizer. So not all prime cognizers have to have their ascertainment induced by themselves. They can still be prime cognizers. Okay? Like for instance, hearing the tappets or seeing the red color. They can be a prime cognizer with respect to red, but not necessarily with respect to its ultimate object, the nature of that red color. With respect to that, whether it's that, whether you would be seeing that or not, if there was fire there or not fire there, that has to be induced by another. In certain cases, if it's far away. Could be that's right in front of you, in which case it can be self-ascertainable. Yeah, that color of fire, that would not be there if that fire were not there. That could be, it can be self-ascertainable. It's not that all fires, red colors have to be other ascertainable. It's just, that's an example of something in the distance, right?
So somebody else, like you said, oh, but somebody could tell you that that was fire because they had binoculars or something, then it is not...
If you cannot ascertain it by yourself, but it has to be induced, ascertainment has to be induced by another direct prime cognizer. In this case, that would have to be, say, an inferential cognizer of which is relying on that person as a valid person.
Maybe, or...
You know, like you're a car mechanic, you know. You've asked Chris over to check your new Cadillac or something like that, and you take him as a valid person. That's kind of the example. Or another direct perception. You get closer and you check on it. Okay, let's look at the examples on the next page here. In our own system, so this is going over some of the wrong views. This is in our own system, wrong loop. When prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves are divided, there are 5 sense-direct prime cognizers to which the ability to perform a function appears. Now this will throw Diana for a loop, I think. Does the ability to perform a function appear to sense cognition? Let's say fire. Does fire have the ability to perform a function? It has the ability. Yeah. What does it have the ability to perform? To burn fuel or to heat or to cook, whatever. Does that appear to direct perception?
No.
To sense, to eye direct perception? When we talked about 2 kinds of knowers, conceptual or perceptual, okay? Conceptual minds are called consciousnesses that engage by elimination, eliminative engagers. They don't engage all of the qualities of something. Say they only engage the quality that appears through the mental image. Perceivers, direct perceptions, are called, say, druk. Druk here means consciousnesses that engage by the establishment or by a positive appearance of something. All of the qualities, all of the impermanent qualities of something, when you have a direct perception of it, whether it be visual or audio or whatever, or what's it called? Olfactory, gustatory, whatever kind of direct perception you have, all of the qualities, impermanent qualities, are appearing in toto together. But it doesn't mean that you realize them. So with the appearance of something which is an impermanent phenomenon, like say fire, which has the ability to perform a function, that does appear to the eye perception. But that doesn't mean the eye perception perceives it. But perceiving that which is familiar and which you have previously ascertained to have that function. And how do you perceive the function of fire as burning, or that water has the function of moisturizing, or that earth has the function of holding and so forth, or wind has the function of motility? How do you realize it? You have to realize it with tactile. Pardon? Touch. Only the sense of touch has the ability to do that. But having felt that fire burns and that water moisturizes and so forth, subsequently when you see that, you can know, your mental consciousness can know only through seeing that it has the ability to perform a function. So it's not that the eye consciousness, it is appearing. The fact that fire has the ability to burn is appearing, but your eye consciousness doesn't actually realize it by itself. Does that make some sense, Jim? Clayton, you getting?
I was thinking about something else.
Oh, you're inattentive. You see how much reverence I hold. It's helping. I'm moving. I just realized I was treating this like a Dharma text. The dark side of the moon by Pink Floyd's. I mentioned this to one of my friends. I heard this was one of the all-time, it was like on the, I read somewhere, heard somewhere that was on the top list for like
All-time album sales.
Yeah, like it was on like the top played album for so many, like 2 years or something like this. I'd never heard of it before, so
It
Supposedly,
still is on the top 10 play.
is that right?
Supposedly, you can start The Wizard of Oz and that at the same time, and they sync up in some interesting way.
Whoa, that's Sergeant Pepper's.
You're really going to keep it busy.
It's even better if you do it backwards.
This is hippie lore.
This is good to know. I'm glad. It's out, guys. Okay. And I think if we brought it along to Matrix, what's it called, Reloaded, probably we could do that too and find the incredible synchronicity of this. Wow. Okay. So there are direct prime cognizers. We're talking about prime cognizers which induce ascertainment by themselves. So there are prime cognizers, let's say a visual prime cognizer, that can induce ascertainment by itself, to which the ability to perform a function appears. That is, simply by seeing that fire, it can induce ascertainment that the ability to perform the function of burning, let's say, or consuming a fuel or whatever, would not be there unless that fire was appearing. Because you have subsequently seen the juxtaposition of the fire. What you're seeing is fire, and you have previously realized that fire has the capacity to burn, let's say with tactile consciousness. No, this still, here it doesn't take any kind of inference.
Now it's going to happen, it's happened before, so I know it's going to be that way now. That's a concept.
No, like for instance, the next one, example, next one. A prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself, such as a sense direct prime cognizer that has a familiar object. For instance, seeing the shape of your friend or your mom or your dad to eye consciousness. Now, does dad appear to eye consciousness, Diana?
Not the label dad.
Does dad appear to, I'm not saying label dad, does dad appear to eye consciousness?
Well, I think you said yes before, but I'm still not getting
So
it.
what is, in all the things that abide together with your father appear to eye consciousness, all the things that abide, that impermanent phenomena abide together appear, but they're not necessarily ascertainable by eye consciousness. What is actually perceived by eye consciousness?
Shape and color.
Only shape and color, right? So, although, I mean, there's a lot of debate about this, you have to check. I mean, it's not debate in the sense that there's dissension, but there's a lot of investigation you have to check. You can say that you see, I can say that I've seen someone. Sometimes you can say you've seen someone because you just see their hair coming over the side of the house, you know. Oh, look at, there's Ashok, you know. You actually, or, you know, Dorji's maybe a better example. Or Carrie, you can say, I see Carrie. Oh, that has to be Carrie. Just by seeing something. And it's possible for a baby, let's say, who is familiar with their mom or dad, their eye consciousness, simply seeing that familiar form, that can induce certainty in their mental consciousness that they are perceiving their mom or dad. It doesn't necessitate any other kind of thought process in between. So that's what's being talked about here. It's not saying that the eye consciousness perceives the person, although you can argue about that. We're just talking about that it can induce that kind of ascertainment without the need of any other kind of intermediate thing. There are self-knowing direct prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves, yogic direct prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves, and inferential prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. And as that last sentence I read to you, if it's in, whatever is an inferential cognizer must be a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself. It can't be, you can't have an inferential cognizer that the ascertainment of which is induced by another. You follow? How could you have an inferential cognizer where someone else has to say, oh, what you've realized is. You follow, Kevin? Inferential cognizer, for instance, realizing that sound is impermanent. Say, for instance, there was such a thing as an inferential cognizer that realized sound is impermanent, but that someone else, you had to depend either on another prime cognizer subsequent to that, or someone else who was a valid person, an expert or someone, to tell you that you've realized what you've realized. That wouldn't be an inferential cognizer then. It has to be something that realizes it by itself. So my question to you is, as we go along here, this is sort of like a homework question for you, if you don't get it today. Here, notice there's two kinds of direct prime cognizers. Direct prime cognizers to which the ability to perform a function appears, and direct prime cognizers that have a familiar object. So there's direct prime cognizers represented. There's self-knowing direct prime cognizers, yogic direct prime cognizers, and then inferential prime cognizers, which are not direct perceptions. How come there is not mental direct prime cognizer which induce ascertainment by itself? Why is there no division here? This is one for the scholars. This is one for Clayton.
I was just going to say it was implicit within the equation, but if the senses, smell it, well, then it's hooked up to the mind. So,
are there any mental direct perceptions?
I'm not sure.
Well, we did. What are the divisions of direct perception, mental direct perception? Do you remember what they were?
Perceptive parts.
It's good honesty. It's a good way to get out of it quickly.
Next.
That's someone else. I don't know. Don, do you remember?
Isn't the self-knowing the apperceptive part direct mental perception?
They have to be categorized as direct perceivers, but they're not called. When we talked about in the 4 divisions of direct perceivers, what did we have? Sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers, self-knowing direct perceivers. There are 4, right? I should know. Here, there's only 3 of them represented. It doesn't talk about mental direct perceivers. That's my own question for you. What might be the reason? Mental direct perceivers that are talked about in this context are all inattentive, aren't they? I mean, the only other kind of mental direct perceivers are the mental direct perceivers of clairvoyance that are not talked about in the context of here. Those are mental direct perceivers. Some dream consciousnesses, according to Lama Tsongkhapa. But otherwise, they're called yogic direct perceivers if they're mental direct perceptions that realize subtle objects that are conducive to the path. Right? So maybe mental direct perceivers in this context are not, there's not going to be any prime cognizers because they only last one instant, right? Anyway, something you think about when you read a little bit more of this. So whatever is one of those 5 is necessarily a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself. How are we doing for time?
We have 22 minutes.
So illustrations. The first is an illustration of a sense direct perceiver to which the ability to perform a function appears. For example, a sense direct perceiver that apprehends fire is able to perform the function of cooking and burning. Okay, we talked about that already, right?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Is it, like in that example, is it the I consciousness that's apprehending the fire's ability to perform functions, or is it actually inducing it in the mental consciousness?
prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. That means alone, they themselves are able to induce an ascertaining consciousness. Ascertaining consciousnesses here are necessarily mental consciousnesses, right?
Okay.
So you can induce ascertainment, that certainty, through having merely seen something. Indeed, the ability to perform the function does appear to the eye consciousness, but eye consciousness itself, our untrained state, like subtle impermanence. Subtle impermanence does appear to our eye consciousness also, but our eye consciousness, the eye consciousness of an ordinary person cannot realize that, it cannot ascertain that fact, cannot realize that fact, say subtle impermanence. It does appear, but only thing that eye consciousness is able to apprehend is shape and color, our shape and color. Yeah. But it can induce ascertainment of other things. Okay, so maybe this is getting a little closer to answering your question. Okay, when you think about this, because Diana was asking about there's a qualm that comes. We're saying, wait a second, I thought here we're saying only eye consciousness only sees shape and color. How can you say that you see a person then? Maybe that eye consciousness is able to induce ascertainment that you saw a person, because that's a conceptual understanding, without the need of any other intermediary conceptual thoughts, when it's a familiar object, let's say. So, Bonnie, do you have a qualm? I see you taking that. You take that, making a knot around your finger. It looks like, you know what I'm thinking, like when there's a... Is that okay? No. Okay, good. Okay. So second one, a sense direct prime cognizer having a familiar object. For example, a sense direct perceiver in the continuum of a son apprehending his father's form. Okay, a familiar object. It could be something, it doesn't have to be something like that. It can be something that you've known before, you've already labeled, you know the name of it. And say the first instant when you see this, I forgot what these things are called, so you told me, okay. But before I knew they were sweet peas, they're just, to me, they're flowers. Okay, so this is an unfamiliar object. That's going to be coming later. A self-knowing direct prime cognizer is, for example, a self-knowing direct perceiver that experiences an eye consciousness. So, self-knowing, are all self-knowers direct cognitions, direct perceptions? What else could they be? If they're not direct perceptions, they could only be, if they're non-conceptual, they could only be what? Wrong consciousnesses, right? So I don't believe I've ever heard of a self-knower which is a wrong consciousness. So there are direct perceptions. So here it says, prime cognizers that induce ascertainment by themselves. So are all self-knowing prime cognizers, I don't even have to say direct, self-knowing prime cognizers, what would that have to mean? That would have to mean the first instant, right? The first instant of a self-knower. Are all of them able to induce ascertainment by themselves? Because here, I'm just wondering if there's some counterexample. Are there some self-knowers that are not able to induce ascertainment by themselves? I have to think about that. Are all self-knowers necessarily prime cognizers? No, it could be second instant. Are they all necessarily realizing consciousnesses? No, they could also be inattentive, right?
Self-knowing consciousness would be inattentive?
Mm-hmm. You know what we had before? When we had the divisions of direct perception, most of the divisions other than yogic direct perception had three divisions: prime cognizers, subsequent cognizers, and inattentive perception. Remember the example? Wasn't there some example about sharvakas and so forth? You remember that? You could find the page very quickly.
Page 16.
Page 16. Examples of the third: an awareness to which an object appears but is not ascertained, which is a self-knowing direct perceiver. In the bottom of page 16. So there are some inattentive perceptions which are inattentive, are a self-knowing direct perceiver in the continuum of a samkhya that experiences bliss as being consciousness. So in other words, the implication here is that self-knower was inattentive because it is a direct perceiver, but the person, the samkhya, believes wholeheartedly that bliss is not a consciousness. So they're not paying attention to that direct perceiver. It's inattentive, okay? Yeah. So, let's see here. Then fourth, a yogic direct prime cognizer, which is a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself. Should be, right? Is, for example, an omniscient consciousness that is an other knowing mental consciousness. Other knowing as opposed to what? Self-knowing, right? Other knower. We talk about self-knowers and other knowers. Self-knowers are the rangrik, things that just know the entity of the consciousness that they're part of. Other knowers is the entity of that consciousness that knows something other than its being clear and knowing, knows another object, right? According to these tenets. Then fifth, an inferential prime cognizer, example which is a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself, is, for example, an inferential consciousness that realizes sound to be impermanent. So what I was saying to you before, if you go back and check about this, think about this later, that sentence that it said at the bottom of 25, whatever is an inferential cognizer must be a prime cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself. How could it be a prime cognizer in which the ascertainment had to be induced by another consciousness? Okay, so when prime cognizers, when ascertainment are induced by another, that means by another consciousness, when they are divided, or in other words, not self-ascertainable, when they are divided terminologically, there are three. Remember what terminological divisions meant? I forgot.
No.
Mark. No. Yeah.
No.
I was asking your name.
Oh, Pat.
Pat, sorry, Pat. I was just
answering the question.
No, I don't.
Oh, I don't.
You're catching on to Clayton's quick trick to get rid of attention. Like, no, I don't. Yes, prime cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another, are divided terminologically. Terminological divisions, does anyone remember what those are? A division that's terminological, or it just is called a division, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that thing. Say, for instance, these are called facsimiles of direct perception could be called one of the terminological divisions of direct perception. It's not really a direct perception, is it? Facsimiles of direct perception. They're just called that terminologically. So here, one of these three, mental direct perceivers, inattentive direct perceivers, and direct perceivers having a cause of error, one of those three, I think, is not an actual prime cognizer where ascertainment is induced by another. Let's check which one. So there's three kinds here. Initial direct Initial direct perceivers, inattentive direct perceivers, and direct perceivers having a cause of error. So what's an illustration? The first, an initial direct perceiver. This would be like, who had told me before? Marcy tell me these were sweet peas, or Thea said these were sweet peas? Marcy? Thanks, Doris. So when I was looking at these, that would have been maybe an initial direct perceiver. Is, for example, a sense direct perceiver in the continuum of a dumb person like George, who has not previously experienced seeing in Upala, which apprehends the color of Upala. This is kind of it's very technical because it's talking about kind of things, examples. What's an Utpala? Sounds like some kind of Middle Eastern delicacy or something, isn't it? Like you'd get a baklava. I'd like a baklava and a couple of Utpalas.
Isn't that the plant that one of the Buddhists is holding?
Yeah.
Right here?
Yeah, often the Utpala is a kind of lotus. It's a blue lotus. It's actually of the lotus family. But certain blue lotuses are called Utpala. And I know when we make certain kinds of incense and medicine, you have to have Utpala flower. Tara is holding an Utpala in her hand. Not all lotuses are Utpala. Lotuses are Utpala flowers. So it's a blue kind of lotus. Manjushri, under his right hand is holding the stem. I'm not sure if it's a lotus, a regular lotus, or if it's an Upala. I think it's just a regular lotus. It doesn't say. Pundarika, what's a Pundarika? Pundarika is a red lotus. There's one sutra called what was it called? Sadharma Pundarika Sutra, that the red lotus, the lotus of the pure Dharma Sutra. This is very famous. So Pundarika is a kind of lotus also. It's a red lotus. Utpala is a blue lotus. So in the continuum of a person who's seeing Utpala, and of course, what are they? Actually, they could be perceiving flower, knowing that it's a flower, but not knowing that it's Utpala. They're giving even an example back from that. They're just seeing the blue color, but not knowing, say, for instance, from the distance, not even seeing that it's a flower. They just see a blue color, not knowing that it's the color of an Utpala flower. Does that make sense to you? This could be an initial direct perception. I think another example, I'm going to say a better example. Say better examples than Prabhuchok. Another example might be the perception that something is a flower, but not yet knowing that it's an Utpala flower, because it hasn't been told to you, or my perception of these flowers, not knowing before Marcy whispered they're sweet peas. You told me before that they were sweet peas, but I've forgotten that. So in a sense, now this is kind of like another initial perception. What are those flowers? It's not able to induce certainty that the apprehension of this flower or this color would not arise unless the sweet pea flower was there, because I don't know that yet. This is just an initial apprehension of that. So there might be many initial apprehensions until one knows what that is, right? It doesn't mean only the first instant, I think. Okay. Does that make sense to you? So the second, an inattentive direct perceiver that has to have ascertainment induced by another is, for example, a sense direct perceiver in the continuum of a person whose mind is especially attracted to a beautiful form which apprehends a sound. So which is being inattentive? What is being not attended to here? The form, the beautiful form, or the sound? Right? The beautiful one?
Sound.
The sound. What's being attended to?
The form.
Yeah, someone's like, whoa, look at that. Did you see that guy? Did you see that girl? And because your mind, your mental consciousness is paying attention to the eye consciousness, what is being perceived by your ear consciousness remains inattentive. It is a consciousness to which an object appears, but it is not ascertained. That consciousness is not able to induce an ascertaining consciousness that you heard something later. And that has to be told to you. Hey, you heard George say, the test was going to, the practice day was going to be this day or whatever. You heard that. Okay, does that make sense? Now, are those first two direct are they both, what's the word we're talking about here? Valid cognizers? Prime cognizers? Because if something is a division of prime cognizers where ascertainment is induced by another, if they're really prime cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another, they have to be prime cognizers, right? But the ascertainment is induced by another, like the example of the fire in the distance. The first one, is that a prime cognizer?
Yes.
It's a prime cognizer with respect to what? Either blue or flower, but not that it's an Impala. Someone has to tell you, you saw it, that was an Impala. Or the example I told you before, I saw some guy coming and gawking at me at the restaurant. When he sat down and my friends had to tell me, that's Robert Redford. Right? So that was I had a prime cognizer of a person, a man, with a young lady, very young, much younger than me. But it wasn't able to induce ascertainment subsequently that I saw Robert Redford. That had to be induced by another. Okay? So it is a prime cognizer. How about the second one? The inattentive perception. Is that a prime cognizer?
With respect to the form.
Here it's supposed to be, the prime cognizer that when ascertainment is induced by another. What is going to be induced by the other? The certainty that you heard or saw.
You heard.
You heard, because you're not certain of it now. The inattentive perception. Is that a prime cognizer? It's not really a prime cognizer, is it? Because remember, of the divisions of direct perceivers, prime cognizer, subsequent cognizer, and inattentive perception are all separate. And if it's an inattentive perception, it's not a prime cognizer. So that's not a real prime cognizer. How about the third? A direct perceiver having a cause of error is, for example, a sense direct perceiver apprehending the color of a mirage, which directly generates a superimposition apprehending the mirage as water. What does that mean, which directly generates a superimposition? Where does it generate the superimposition? In your eye consciousness or what? To your mental consciousness. So instead of, like say for instance, if I see Bonnie's form, that's a familiar person, that's able to induce certainty that I saw Bonnie the next instant. But if I see a color, wavering color in the distance, like the color of a mirage or the wavering of a mirage, that is capable in a person who's not learned in mirages, is able to induce a superimposition that is a wrong consciousness, thinking that that is water. That superimposition means like a superimposition in the sense that the mind is superimposing something there, the mental consciousness is superimposing something on that is not really there. Okay?
To me that seems to be the same function as perceiving fire and knowing that it burns, that there's like a mental function step in there.
There doesn't have, this can happen immediately. The person, because of familiarity with seeing that shimmering color and thinking and finding it is water in the past, the person can mistakenly think that this is water, but it's not actually water. So that's not a prime cognizer either. So those are terminological divisions. We have just a couple minutes left, right? So let's just stop here, and I'll mention, if you have a chance, next class, to do these 10, take a half hour sometime. You can take one look at them. Maybe if you looked at them, you take one more look at them. But not like taking notes. And then close it, and then do a little, you can go back and look at some sections, and then, it's not just, this is just good. Then after you take them, next time we'll see what your score was, and then you can go back and be motivated to check that again. And see if you can read the section on self-ascertainable, other ascertainable, non-self-ascertainable, and generate some ascertainment. Okay, let's try to dedicate the energy. This is just beginning the second half of the course. I think it's in the 7th class today, 7th Buddhist class. So we're doing well. Should rejoice to create even more merit. I think whatever merits I've created, may they become the cause of my quickly realizing all of the good qualities and eliminating all of the faults in my continuum for the benefit of all sentient beings. May I, due to these merits, may I quickly achieve the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. May they not simply ripen in some pleasure, which is actually the nature of suffering within cyclic existence, that is experienced once in the future as some relief. But in whatever way they ripen, may they become a cause of my continued practice and sharing with others, overcoming my obstacles slowly, developing good qualities, wisdom, compassion, renunciation. Try to first make that conventional dedication. Due to these merits, for instance, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all sentient beings to that very state. And when you've got the flavor of that conventional aspiration, that dedication, try to seal it within the emptiness of the 3 spheres. The emptiness of the merits, the goal dedicated to, and the act of dedication that tries to join the two. All 3 of them are empty of existing the way that they appear as somehow findable within their bases of imputation. They exist, they function conventionally, but they're empty of any kind of inherent or ultimate existence.